Everything Everywhere All at Once is a 2022 film written and directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, collectively known as Daniels. Its setup centers on the idea that for every choice every person makes, the universe fractures into multiple timelines, each with a different version of ourselves who chose one of the different options. It is a movie about regret, about living with the knowledge of the paths not taken, about the absurdity of knowing we are defined by our tiniest decisions, and about the power of looking that knowledge in the face and choosing to find meaning in being where we are with the people who are here with us. Well, somewhere out there in the multiverse is a version of me who is a Hollywood stunt performer, and she was pretty blown away by what this movie manages to accomplish with its stunts. Yes, we are doing that thing again where we take a beautifully made movie with endless artistic merit and emotional depth and mine it for content about people hitting the ground. Welcome to my channel. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually have access to verse jumping technology, so let me be super upfront that I have never been more than a hobbyist when it comes to stunts. I've worked on some student films and internet shorts, and I've done some professional level training. For those in the know, I have been to Seattle. But I am not a professional stunt performer, and I have never worked on a union set. So take me with a Cerveza Rita's worth of large grains of salt, but since I'm still a video essayist and nobody can stop me, you literally cannot stop me. The video's already been made, you're watching it, you continue to be stuck with me. Let's talk about everything, everywhere, all at stunts. So the action in this movie is really interesting for a couple of reasons connected to the way it uses its multiverse concept. I'm gonna try my best to keep spoilers to a minimum because for once I can, but basically there is an evil force attempting to destroy the whole multiverse, and an unassuming laundromat owner named Evelyn, played by Michelle Yeoh, has suddenly become the best hope we've got for saving everything, everywhere. This is all laid out for her by an alternate version of her husband Waymond, played by Ke Huy Quan, who comes from the timeline where that evil force originated, a timeline he calls the Alphaverse. And he teaches Evelyn about verse jumping.
1, 2, 3.
Like that?
Oh, it's a woo-cha. It's a woo-cha. Oh, sorry. Do I actually have to say woo-cha like that?
If it helps you.
Woo-cha!
Verse jumping, the movie's primary sci-fi mechanic, allows characters to borrow knowledge, skills, and even physical traits from their alternate selves. The technology, developed by the Alphaverse version of Evelyn, who has since been killed by that big evil, uses these Bluetooth headsets to harness probability. A character can use an improbable action, like eating a tube of chapstick, breaking into song, or delivering an earnest declaration of love for their enemy, as a jumping pad to connect to an alternate timeline and access something that will help them out in this moment. It's easy to see how this concept creates an opportunity for super innovative and fun action. The Evelyn we meet isn't a trained fighter, but some version of her somewhere is, so she can kick ass despite being a relative schmuck. This makes for a gorgeous variety in fighting styles, both in ways that are about as grounded as this conceit could hope to be, like Jamie Lee Curtis's Deirdre as a pro wrestler against Evelyn as a high-level martial artist, and in ways that are far more fantastical but plenty fun enough to justify the suspension of disbelief, like how would a sign spinner fight? What about a teppanyaki chef? What kinds of makeshift weapons could they use? How would they move? And because Evelyn is the only character whose multiversal selves we really get the details on, there's a lot of fun to be had in guessing what surprise skills the other characters are working with. Like, what version of Waymond would figure out how to fight with a fanny pack? I'm torn between Lion Tamer and Dominatrix, but leave your guesses in the comments. There are literally no wrong answers. Plus, of course, there are more pacifistic skills that can still facilitate interesting action storytelling, like how do you escape an enclosed space slowly filling with poison gas? Guess what? If you made a few different choices in your childhood, you could have the breath control of an opera singer. Need to slip a pair of handcuffs? How about a universe with a way earlier divergent point point where human fingers, never developed bones. The jumping pads also make for occasional variety in the action, not just in terms of the fighting style, but in terms of the construction of the fights themselves. There are plenty of scenes where one character is straightforwardly trying to knock another out, but sometimes there's a shift in the goal. The butt plug fight, for example, no, I will not elaborate, starts with a significant chunk that is basically Evelyn playing keep away. This is all really, really cool stuff that makes for basically infinitely creative action. It's super, super fun to watch. But my interest in the stunts in this movie runs a good bit deeper, so let's move past the surface. Let's get into the weeds. I'm gonna show you something seemingly simple, and then I'm gonna tell you why it blew my mind. First off, what this stunt performer just did is called a scorpion. If you remember from my video on The Invisible Man where I talked about different kinds of falls, this is in a category called a wreck, which basically means that while there is a good bit of technique involved in landing on parts of the body that can take a bit of a beating and protecting the parts that can't, the performer actually does hit the ground with the full force of gravity. So with this particular wreck, there's a bit of an optical illusion. This is not actually a faceplant. You land on the shoulder and the impact can be distributed across the arm, and the counterweight of the feet helps to control both the landing and then the sort of flop out of it, so the whole thing is repeatable, both on the level of doing multiple takes and the level of still having a functioning body in 5 years. I've watched someone I was training with take a good 3 or 4 of these in a row. It's doable if you know what you're doing. The set also has mats hidden under the carpets to mitigate the impact of that and a number of other big falls in this sequence. But this is obviously a really tricky thing to do right, and it has the potential to go disastrously if done wrong. It's a pretty specialized skill. If you need a scorpion, you hire a performer who you know can do a scorpion. Entire careers are built on the ability to execute this fall.
There was a guy that I brought in for that very final hit. I wanted that to be the most brutal reaction in the entire fight. It's a very specialty reaction. Not very many people can do it.
One particularly great thing about it is that while it reads as a faceplant, the right camera angle will completely hide the performer's face. This actually also allows them to use their other hands to spot themselves and move a little of the impact into that arm as well. If you can see that arm, it looks more like the gymnastic move it kind of ultimately is, and less like the brutal fall it's supposed to be. But even without that, just the ability to hide the face is a pretty big deal. See, most stunt performers on any given film or TV set are what you call utility stunts. This is as opposed to stunt doubles, who are hired to stand in for a specific actor when their character needs to do something that requires a high level of specialized skill, like precision driving or serious martial arts, or is reasonably dangerous. You know, if Gal Gadot breaks her ankle, your whole production is shot, but if Caitlin Deschelle does, I mean, stunt performers are bananas, so she might just fucking rally. But if she can't, you can probably track down another skinny 5'10" stunt lady to finish out the shoot, or both, like a high fall or a fire burn or a scorpion. But utility stunt performers are there to step in wherever you just need someone to fight or fall down or drive a car or whatever. There's usually at least some sort of idea of what stunts you need ahead of time. Big action set pieces will have a previs stage, and if you're going to need someone with a specific skill set, like driving a motorcycle or riding a horse or doing a high fall over 30 feet or a scorpion, you need to know that they can do that before you hire them. But film is a chaotic business, and you will not know every single detail of every single shot until it's happening. So utility stunt performers will generally have a basic idea of what they're in for, but they also need to be ready to jump in for whatever comes up on the day. From stuff that's always been on the shot list but wasn't complex enough to need previs, to the actor who's stepping into the scene turns out to be a good bit smaller than the person who was standing in for them at the gym, and this fight is supposed to look pretty evenly matched, so we need to swap out the guy fighting them for someone a little less jacked, to now that we've fully set this shot up on location, it looks a little empty. Let's get a couple of folks looping the second phrase from that fight we shot this morning over in that corner and throw in a few more bad guys bumbling uselessly without looking too useless. to Mr. Pitt doesn't feel like he's punched enough dudes to look like a sufficiently bad bitch yet. And because of the way movies get made, this often means that you'll end up with the same stunt performer getting knocked out multiple times over the course of multiple scenes in the same movie. Now, typically, this is achieved by some very careful movie magic of costuming and choreography. This is one reason why tactical gear is an absolute gift to your stunt department. You can make a pretty much infinite SWAT team out of a relatively small number of stunt performers if you can justify throwing helmets on them, and you can bring every single one of them back as mafiosos in the casino or whatever later on because we haven't seen any of their faces. When I've worked student films, basically the whole stunt team just brings in whatever stuff we've got that basically fits the wardrobe and spends all day swapping pieces out. Like, okay, I haven't worn a scarf yet, how about a baseball cap? We definitely got a close-up of my face earlier, does anyone have sunglasses I can borrow? And then there's the awareness you need to have as a performer of when you are seen to be critically hurt. In a lot of utility work, that's gonna be basically every time you step up, because that's kind of the established rules of film action at this point. Your hero can take a good amount of damage and still be fine, your goons take 1 to 3 good smacks and hit the ground. This leads to an idea called burning your face. Basically, if we've seen you recognizably die or get knocked out or even hit the ground hard enough that some bones are probably broken, we can't really see you up and kicking again. Your big bads, your mini bosses, they can lick their wounds and come back with some blood and bruises, but with your grunts, you run the risk of your audience asking a lot of questions, especially if they look suspiciously like the same grunts from that other scene who were supposedly a whole different group of people. Now, in terms of film, this is mostly just a continuity thing, obviously, but if you think about TV, it becomes a major consideration for stunt performers themselves in terms of getting work. A film shoot, you're pretty much booked. Even if your face is burned and we can't justify putting you in a helmet, well, there's still safety work, which is stuff like spotting for air rams and wire work, or holding the edges of mats so they stay in place when people are flying at them, and there's still gear to be lugged, which is a big chunk of how stunt performers spend their time on set anyway. But say you work one episode of a TV show and you take a car hit as Lady with Shopping Bag. It's a pretty featured stunt, it looks fabulous on your reel, everything's great, unless that show is Alphabet Soup : major US city and runs for a double-digit number of seasons. Now you're missing out on potentially years of work because you can't really have Lady with Shopping Bag showing up 2 years later as back alley drug dealer without opening yourself up for a lot of questions from your more attentive audience members and binge watchers. So in general, this is something most stunt performers and crew in general working with stunt performers are going to try to avoid. Plus there's also the whole thing where, you know, if you have to be a dead or unconscious body for any amount of time, it's good to try to land in such a way that your face is as hidden from the camera as possible anyway. It's just a lot easier to sell. Tenuously related story, one time I was acting in a feature and we needed this like super dramatic shot of my character's dead body being discovered. So like super gruesome, eyes still open and everything, and it was going to get used as this recurring flashback, so we needed a close-up and it needed to be a relatively long take. And I mean, that shit is so hard. There's like so much stuff going on in front of your face, and if your eyes move at all, it's really obvious that you're alive, so you have to pick one speck to stare at. And in my case, I accidentally picked a speck that the DP's arm sometimes brushed in front of. So difficult. And then there's this whole problem of blinking. And this DP kept being like, no, you're about to blink. Stop blinking. Just stop blinking. And we finally realized that he had this like physical anomaly where he just didn't need to blink. So he just had no frame of reference for the length of shot that was reasonably physically possible. And yeah, that made me feel a whole lot less bad about the whole thing. Point is, in your typical action film, you will not see a lot of clear faces from your goons and your grunts. If you want to get a sense of how this normally works, the Hulu movie The Princess is a really useful example. It's 94 minutes and like 75% action by runtime. It's one hero against an endless army of bad guys who mostly get hit 1 to 3 times and drop dead, and there are 38 utility stunt performers listed in the credits. If you haven't seen the movie, that probably sounds like a lot. If you have seen the movie, you know that many bodies hit the floor in like the first 20 minutes. Wardrobe and camera angles. So let's circle back to Everything Everywhere All at Once and that scorpion. Yes, the fall itself hides the performer's face, but in the shot immediately preceding it, Cha! So, how do we pull that off? Rakakuni.
Was I Raccoon Wayman again?
I'm gonna leave that terminology unexplained for anyone who hasn't seen the movie yet, because you deserve to go on that journey yourself if you want. It's pretty much the hardest I have laughed in a movie theater ever, but basically this is something that only really the Alphaverse characters do. They're the protectors of the multiverse, so in order to fight this big evil force in whatever timeline is most relevant at any point, they can basically take over any of their alternate bodies whenever they need to. But action movie shenanigans being what they are, there is a point when the Alphaverse determines that our Evelyn is actually hurting their cause, and they need to put the kibosh on that. So they all Rakakuni into her timeline to take her down. And this is how you end up with a full-fat action film with only 11 credited stunt performers. 11. 1-1. 11. What? So the first important thing to mention is this is largely a function of the way these credits are distributed. Daniels apparently like to audition stunt performers for small but action-heavy roles that need to act at least a little, but would be a pain to double. So by my count, there are another 13 members of the stunt department who are listed with the cast. All of the security guards from this fight, and the police officers in this one, and 6 of the more prominently featured alphas, and alternate Evelyn's kung fu mentor, and her competitor. So that's why you see additional stunt performers in the credit roll, because a lot of the team is already credited in other places. But just to give you a sense of how few people we're talking about with those 10 additional performers, that includes production designer Jason Kisvarde, who, according to the director's commentary, earned his SAG card on this set by driving the RV that serves as the Alphaverse HQ. Badass. This is worth shouting out real quick. Stunt driving can be really easy to peg when you've got something like a car chase, but it also encompasses a lot of stuff that might not seem so exciting because cars are big and filmmaking demands precision. Starting at 25 miles per hour and coming to a smooth stop within inches of a mark might not result in something that looks super action-packed, but it is extremely tricky, and cameras are expensive. And fragile. So stunt drivers can typically get just as much work on something like car commercials as on action films. Also, Evelyn's double, Kira O'Connor, is the only double with her own credit, so everyone else's are coming out of that pool of 10 additional performers, or from people who are credited as actors and doubled up. Like, Wayman was doubled in different scenes both by D.Y. Sao, who is credited as an additional performer, and by Andy Lay, who is credited as a fight choreographer and as a character called Alpha Jumper Bigger Trophy. If you know, you know. Jamie Lee Curtis also definitely had a double. Fun fact, that big flying knee strike is actually her on a wire, but you bet your ass she did not jump off this balcony, and just because that scene was deleted doesn't mean someone didn't have to do it. I would guess there are also doubles for at least James Hong and Stephanie Hsu, possibly Jenny Slate, and maybe even Biff Whiff too. This is not that many names for the sheer amount of work they ultimately represent. So let's talk about how they pulled that off. Well, this is a huge advantage of the multiverse. We're looking at infinite versions of the same characters, so just because they took a licking in one universe doesn't mean they can't keep on ticking in another. With a little careful planning, you can use the same performer over and over and over again without ever needing to disguise or hide their face or demote them to the background. Li Jing is a standout example of this. She is a kung fu master in one universe and a disciple of the nefarious Jobu Tupaki in another, so we get to see her spar with Hong Kong action star Evelyn as her mentor in one scene and fight against laundromat owner and unlikely hero Evelyn as her enemy in another. She is recognizably the same performer, but we understand she's not quite the same character, and so within the rules of this universe, it doesn't break continuity to have her play both. There's something else I want to mention about this possibility where your crew of goons are from a different universe and can make use of the bodies of whatever relatively unassuming human from another, which has to do with gender in the stunt industry. I'm not sure how much this is really a thing in this movie specifically, but it's something I care a lot about, so I want to talk about it anyway. So generally, this sort of faceless goon type of role makes up a lot of entry-level stunt gigs. You need a lot more bad guys than you do heroes, and your bad guys could get knocked out pretty fast in ways that don't require your coordinator to have a lot of prior knowledge of their specific skill set. Being able to take a punch is the absolute baseline thing to demonstrate on a halfway decent reel. The thing is, if our good guy is played by, say, Keanu Reeves, then, say, I am never going to get hired as a goon. Because that would mean Keanu Reeves sucker punching a woman. Now, obviously, this is really complicated. The filmmaking process is not divorced from the messages its products communicate. Optics are kind of the whole business. But I think it's worth at least mentioning what this can do for the careers of stunt women. Anecdotally, for the acquaintances of mine who have had success breaking into the industry as professionals, I have noticed, in general, a much higher level of expertise among the women than the men at the point when they start getting hired. As I've said, my only first-hand experience has been as an amateur, but even at that level, I've seen this be an issue. I've watched killer previs get sent off only to have the director come back and say that the fight looks great, but we need to swap out most, if not all, of the women, because our hero is not going to come out of that tracking shot looking like a hero after knocking them all out. As a person who was really on that grind with live show auditions for a while, I have been in rooms where I watched guys I knew had less training and experience than I did get kept for second and third rounds, while I and every other woman in the room, plenty of whom I'm sure had way more training and experience than I did, got asked if we had one highly specialized skill set and immediately sent home if we said no, because they needed to hire plenty of men to take it, but only a few women to dish it out. Even stuff as small as, through my training, I know more or less what an entry-level gig for a budding stuntman is. I've been told what that kind of work looks like, and I can explain it to you. I don't really have as much of a sense what that kind of gig is for a stunt woman. That doesn't mean those gigs don't exist, or even necessarily that they're all that much more difficult to come by if you're better at and more committed to hustling than I had a chance to be. For what it's worth, a big part of the reason almost all of the instructors at that program where I did most of my training were men, and could only speak to how the industry works for men, was because their female colleagues get too much work to take 2 weeks to a month off to teach aspiring newbies. But that does still mean that a certain amount of the business advice I got from that training didn't actually apply to me, or to a big chunk of my classmates. And I want to be really clear that this isn't just sour grapes on my part. There are a lot of reasons I personally am not working in the industry, and the vast majority of them have nothing to do with my gender. But, I think about it when I see, Marvel having to cordon off the ladies in the middle of the big battle to have their own pod fight. I don't have a simple solution for this. And maybe it's not even something that needs to be solved. Stunt women who are actually working, or even actively trying to break into the industry, are the people we should listen to about this. And I'm not one of them right now, and I don't know if I ever will be. But it is cool to see a pretty high proportion of lady goons get their asses kicked in this movie in a way that isn't going to raise any eyebrows. A lot of this is that they're mostly fighting Michelle Yeoh, so the same optics problem doesn't even really exist in the first place, but it is also an advantage of the setting, and it's an advantage that has been taken. And finally, there's the general chaos of the multiverse that allows for performers who are consistently playing the same character in the physical sense to take lickings and keep on ticking in the same universe with a little more abandon than you might be able to get away with in a more linear story. Brian Lay is a great one to follow for this. We see him in 2 fights as a security guard, and then 3 more having been Rakakuni'd by his Alphaverse counterpart. Now, if you isolate and follow just the parts of the story that take place in this universe, you'll notice that there is a good amount of care and attention paid to justifying that continued cycle of lickings and tickings. In his first appearance, he gets the shit whacked out of him by Alpha Wayman's fanny pack, back, and when he comes back after not much in-universe time has elapsed, he's got nose plugs in, so there's an acknowledgement of the damage he's already taken. Next, we see him having been taken over by his Alphaverse self, and at the end of this fight, Evelyn makes a point of telling her family that she is a strictly non-lethal fighter.
Is he dead? See? Not dead.
And in the background, you can see Lei starting to dust himself off. He's taken enough of a beating that it makes sense he doesn't come running after Evelyn immediately, but not enough that you don't buy him coming back after she's spent a little time being stalled by 2 other fights. And then he takes a KO when Evelyn, well, again, you get that he's in significant pain, but not dead or unconscious, so it makes sense to see him back again. Now, Lei's character is a bit more of a mini-boss than a faceless goon. He and his brother Andy actually choreographed the martial arts for this movie. Daniels found them on YouTube and wanted to really feature them in their own right as well. So it's not really that out of the ordinary to see this kind of character be given a little more leeway to be able to pick himself up and come back in another fight. But the fact that there is so much else going on in the movie makes it a little less obvious that that's what's happening, both with highly featured performers like the Lei brothers and with more background action players. There is so much chaos to keep track of. So many characters who are in different places with different personalities and different life experiences at the same time that the audience is going to be far less inclined to question it. There has clearly been work put in on the production side to make sure that there is continuity. It is there for the kind of person who's going to notice and question that the same security guard who just got knocked out by a bag of rocks is back on his feet within a couple of in-universe hours. But the continuity doesn't need to announce itself the way it might in a more straightforward action movie. But that ability to get the most bang per buck out of each individual performer isn't the only thing that's great about this. That genre convention of action baddies as an endless string of replaceable grunts whose faces are mostly obscured or hidden may come out of a genuine practical concern, but it also dehumanizes the victims of the vast majority of the violence. There's a way you get used to looking at this kind of character in this kind of movie, and so to see it done so differently here doesn't just ping my spidey senses as a person who knows something about the process, it subverts a trope. These characters show up again and again. They're not hidden behind helmets or sunglasses because they don't have to be. They are an infinite army of goons, but they are about as humanized as it is possible for a goon to be. By the end of the movie, they aren't faceless foot soldiers of a hive mind. They're people. So this isn't just a choice that streamlines the filmmaking and makes it more achievable on a relatively small-scale production, although it certainly is that. It also weaves the film's theme of empathy, even and especially empathy with those you might think of as enemies, all the way down to the construction of the action. So that recording of Claire de Lune you just heard is, at the time of recording this, the source of a very annoying, bogus copyright claim on this video, because YouTube's Content ID system can't tell the difference between the Creative Commons licensed recording of Claire de Lune I used and whatever recording of Claire de Lune is owned by record company Warner Chappell. So YouTube is letting Warner Chappell monetize this whole video. Or at least that's the Cliff's Notes. It's a bit more complicated than that, but thankfully I was able to clearly understand the factors at play and send a killer dispute because I recently beefed up my understanding of copyright law with a class from Devin Stone, aka Legal Eagle. It's a great crash course that really set me up to know my rights as an artist and fight for them even on a platform that's set up to always give the benefit of the doubt to the bigger corporation, and I can't recommend it enough as a resource for anyone who makes art, especially independently and especially online. It's also just a fascinating topic presented in a super interesting and engaging way, which is exactly what smart online video people are so great at. And you can check it out with this video's sponsor, Nebula Classes. Nebula Classes lets top creators like Legal Eagle and Polyphonic, Georgia Dow, Amy Nolte, and some of the team behind Extra Credits share their knowledge and expertise expertise on all kinds of fascinating topics in their super interesting and engaging voices. It also includes Nebula Talks, which are shorter form, inspirational guest lectures, and new classes and talks are added all the time. Plus, a classes membership also gets you access to the rest of Nebula, the streaming service built and owned by creators where we can make the stuff we want to make, even if it might not be right for YouTube. You can find the whole catalogs of creators you already love with no ads or sponsor reads, plus a bunch of incredible original stuff, like Patrick H. Willem's extremely fun and silly feature film, Night of the Coconut, which, fun fact, I am very briefly in, and smaller bonus content, like a cut of this video that is basically the same, except that it includes a couple of movie clips that are very relevant to my points, but that I can't show on YouTube without getting age restricted. Normally, Nebula Classes is $149 for a full year, but if you sign up using my link in the description or by going to nebula.app/Laura Crone, you'll get an exclusive discount bringing your annual subscription down to $119. And if you already have Nebula through the Curiosity Stream bundle, you can upgrade your account and get access to classes for $89 for the full year. You should do it, if you want. Thank you so much to all of my patrons for making videos like this possible, with an extra special thank you to Alexander Brogan, Patrick Behringer, Brett C.S., DataFox, Ilona Concetta, and Michelle. If you'd like to help support my work, Patreon is the best way to do that, so you can check it out at patreon.com/Laura Crone.